It wasn't until I was living back in the United States that I kind of realized like why everybody was always so floored about the volume of kids. I mean, I know it's an unusual number, but I fostered probably 40 kids over the course of the next 10 years.
You weren't even married yet?
No, at the beginning I was not married.
So when you look at a picture of our guest family, it makes you stop and go, what is happening here?
Well, and some of our listeners, maybe you're like us, that you've heard about our guest and you're like, what in the world is happening? How could this woman do this?
Well, tell them who it is.
We have Katie
Katie's
Davis.
over there. She's smiling. She's afraid to even say anything.
Katie Davis Majors is with us today. Katie, we can't wait to talk to you because we're going to talk about these books, but we really want to hear your story, your life story, because it's very unusual. So we're really excited that you're here. But
thank you.
So,
well, what I was talking about, when you talk about a family picture, seriously, when I go on the internet and I look you up, I'm like, what is happening? There's like, it looks like 100 kids. There's not 100 kids. How many?
15.
15 kids. And how did they all come to be a part of your family?
Yeah, I moved over to Uganda. Actually, right after high school, I moved to Uganda. I thought I was going to do a gap year there, volunteering at an orphanage, and really just fell in love with Uganda. The people, the culture, they're so warm, so hospitable, so kind. I was also really overwhelmed by the need. I had never experienced such immense poverty and need. And as I was living at this orphanage and befriending all the kids that lived there, I came to realize that a lot of these children had family. They had living moms and dads and grandparents and relatives all right in that same community. And so by and large in East Africa, children who live in an institution, they might not be completely abandoned by their family. Their family might not have died, but they send the children to live in an orphanage because they really believe that they'll have a better life there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, statistically, this is an old statistic, but about 85% of children in East Africa as a whole that live in institutional care have at least one living parent. And so the Ugandan government and the governments of the surrounding countries are actually doing a really good job trying to push for more foster care as opposed to institutions, just because, research is showing that it is not beneficial to a child to grow up as one of 150 kids with just a few caretakers. And so that was the situation that I lived in.
Wait, take me back just for a second, because you're probably 18. You're 18 years old.
I was.
You walk into this orphanage and you start spending your time with all these kids. Like, what did you feel when you realized this is how these kids are living over here?
I think I was simultaneously overwhelmed with love for these kids. They were just all so wonderful and so sweet. And I befriended them. I taught a little kindergarten class in the morning on the grounds of the orphanage. And then in the afternoon, I would just hang out with whoever was home from school. And so, they got to be my friends, but I was also so saddened by the idea. I think my kind of American mindset or the stereotype I had in mind was that they had to live in this place because something bad had happened to their families. And so I was so saddened to hear them talk about parents and grandparents and even sometimes brothers and sisters that lived, like a 10-minute walk from where we were. And the reason they couldn't live at home was just poverty. Their parents wanted them to eat 3 meals a day. They wanted them to be able to afford to go to school. School wasn't free. And so if you lived at the orphanage, you could get a sponsor from America, and then you could go to school. And so parents were making this huge, unimaginable sacrifice to say, no, actually, you go live somewhere else so that you can have what is perceived as kind of a better life.
Did the parents ever visit their kids?
Sometimes they would visit.
Yeah.
Sometimes the kids would go visit them. I remember the government would mandate that the kids go home for the Christmas holiday. And so at Christmas break, there were 9 kids that stayed in the orphanage and 120 who went off site, meaning 120 of them had families. And I was just thinking, like, if these families love their kids and they want their kids, and Uganda is a super community-oriented culture, it's not uncommon to raise your sister's children, or if something happens to someone in the community, to bring those kids into your home. It's just poverty that's kind of the hurdle for people. And so I just remember thinking, if these kids have families that they can go visit for a couple weeks at a time, surely we can do something to make it so that they can live with their family all the time. And that's kind of how, very organically, without any vision or strategy or 5-year plan or whatever, that's how the ministry I founded, Amazima, was started. There was a grandmother in the community who I had gotten to know at church, and she had twin 5-year-olds that she was raising because her daughter had passed away. And she was thinking about, they were coming up on the age where they would need to start school. And she was thinking about asking the man who ran the orphanage if her girls could have a spot there. And I asked her, if I could help you, if I could somehow get the money to send the girls to school, maybe I could help out with food from time to time, or medical care if they need to go to the hospital. But if I could help out with the financial part of it, would you want to keep the girls at home? And she just started crying and was like, of course. I want to raise these girls. I want to raise them in their community. I don't want to send them to live somewhere else, but I want them to have access to education and a future. So, I'm 18 years old. I call my mom. I'm like, hey, I need $100. Look what we're going to do with it. Kind of start describing what I'm seeing to my parents. My parents are huge advocates. I mean, obviously, they're incredible. They're the people who taught me about Jesus, about love and service and, loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And so they had instilled that in me. And as I was telling them these stories, they were like, okay, we'll help. So they started telling friends and family here in the United States, like, hey, if you give Katie $100, she can send kids to school and she can buy them food and she can help them out with medical care. And so I started sponsoring these 2 twin girls to go to school so that they could stay at home with their grandmother, live in their community with their siblings and their neighbors where they had grown up. And that same grandmother would say to me, hey, there's another family, up the hill and over here and down the dirt path that their kids don't go to school at all. What do you think? And I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm on it. So within my first year of living in Uganda, I was raising money from the United States to send 40 children to school. And they would, I was able to, I had my afternoons free every day. And so I would just walk to these people's homes. I would walk down these red dirt roads, and just the generosity, of the people that I encountered was so mind blowing. They would always invite me in. They would always prepare food for me. And these are people who, I grew up in a very affluent situation. These are people who I'm looking at thinking, you do not have enough. You do not have enough food to be sharing it with me. It took me a long time to learn to receive what people were trying to share with me, because it didn't feel right, but just the hospitality and the warmth and the generosity that I received from these families was so incredible.
Are you just thinking, we can expect more from our kids? I'm just thinking as a parent, I'm thinking grandparents, I'm thinking you're an 18-year-old girl.
Kid. You're a kid.
I am a kid, for sure. I think about it now and I'm like, what? What were you doing?
I'm telling you. And just to think we need to protect. We put so many boundaries that are necessary, but also we put so many limitations on what God could do and how he can use us or our kids. Like you came back. Okay, go back through this, because how many did you sponsor by the time that?
So I was paying for 40 kids to go to school in the first year.
Sponsors from the United States.
It was just really organic, friends and family. I started writing a blog, really again, just as a way to keep, the couple friends and family that were sending in money, just to give them a little update. I don't think people were using the term like viral way back then, but essentially
it went viral.
A ton of people started reading my blog and they wanted to help and they wanted to send money. And I was, again, a child, didn't know what to do with money, but I was like, hey, as long as the funds are coming in, I'm going to use it to help more people in my community. And so decided to kind of formalize the thing and was like, okay, this is going to be a nonprofit. We have to have a good and legal way to be collecting the money and distributing it. And so as I really prayed and asked the Lord, like, what would you have this ministry be about? I kept coming back to the verse in John where it says, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free. It's Jesus who says that. And I wanted that. I wanted these kids to not just have access to education and medical care and like their basic human needs. Of course, that was important. But more than that, I wanted them to know the gospel. I wanted them to know their worth and their value because of Jesus. And so Amazima is the Uganda word for truth. And our mission has remained just, we want every family and every student that we encounter to know the truth of who Jesus is and who he created them to be, and that they do have a hope and a future far beyond an earthly hope and a future, which we hope we're able to provide them through education, but far beyond that, they have a hope and a future in heaven. And so, we started meeting together. I had a little tiny front porch, not much bigger than this table. And we would sit outside and we would study the Bible together. And we would make like a big pot of rice and beans so that we could share a meal together.
Who's we?
So like myself and these 40 kids and some of their family members and whoever would, in Uganda, most of life takes place outside. You cook outside, you eat outside, you do your laundry outside, you hang it up outside. And so, you're kind of always in this space with your friends and your neighbors. And God has so tremendously blown away any expectation that I ever had of what this ministry could be. It was always really important to me that these kids had a direct relationship with somebody at Amazima, which of course at the beginning was just me. And then I hired a woman who had been translating for me in the kindergarten classroom where I was still volunteering some. And I said hey, in the afternoons when we're not doing that, can you come with me and translate for me in these homes and help me get to know these people? And so she was at first it was just me and her. And as we got more and more funds, we wanted to help more and more students. And so I began to hire other community members to kind of help keep track of all the logistics. And today, so this was, oh my goodness, 17 years ago.
Wow.
Almost 18 years ago. So fast forward today, we have 2 schools. We actually ended up building a couple really beautiful, really nice schools in the community to send our children to, and to also invite other students from the community to come to school. The school day in Uganda is very long. Kids leave super early in the morning and they come back really late at night. And it was really, again, important to us to have that relational component of the ministry. So every student is assigned a mentor who's an Amazima staff member. And their goal is truly just to be a person who's continually checking in and continually pointing these students toward Jesus. There was a woman in my community when I was 15, 16, 17 years old, who was really just took an interest in me and started inviting me to go on walks and inviting me to study the Bible with her. And I had grown up in a believing home and I knew who Jesus was, but the way that this woman, Jenny, who mentored me, the way that she loved the word and the way that she talked about Jesus and to Jesus as if he was just, right there in her living room, like her buddy or something. That was so transformational to my faith when I was very, very young. And so I want to make sure, and we at Amazima, it's a big part of our mission that these students are intentionally discipled
and it's
mentored.
one-on-one.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what's so crazy. I was thinking like 5-on-1 would even be good, but 1-on-1 is incredible.
They do. I mean, it's a mix. They have, they have small groups where they meet, but they also have mentors who come and check on them in their homes and do one-on-one discipleship with them. And I think that's just super transformative in our faith to have someone older than us that we are looking up to, and that, that's a little bit further down the road who can say, like, you're going to make it. You're going to make it through this. We always say
to have somebody ahead of you, beside you, and behind you.
Yes.
You grow when you have that, for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, what's amazing about your story, we've been to Africa and we come home. Yeah. A lot of people have gone on a mission trip, and it's an awesome, we went there for a week and even went into the bush outside Nairobi. It's incredible, but you go, you see a need. You're 18 years old, and now you're, in your 30s, but it's like, I can't just go home. We can do something.
We're Ann and Dave Wilson.
We're inviting you to dinner.
On a cruise.
On the Love Like You Mean It boat. February 8th through the 15th. It's going to be a great week. We're going to draw 3 couples' names out of a hat, and they're going to have dinner with us on the cruise.
You're going to be disappointed, probably. You're going to be like, oh, they're so boring. But the cruise is amazing.
Yeah, you're going to love it. You get marriage teaching every night, workshops, comedians, music, the waves, the sun.
Destinations.
Yeah, it is a great, great cruise. Dinner with us on the cruise. You got to sign up by December 15th. Go to FamilyLife.com/marriage cruise. Sign up there. And we look forward to having dinner with you.
We want to get to know you. See you there.
You're not Katie Davis anymore. You're Katie Davis Majors. So when did you get married? Was it long after that?
Yeah, I got married in early 2015. We got married in January. So like 8 years later.
But we have to go back to adopting these kids.
Oh, yeah,
we skipped. We
skipped ahead.
You wrote a book that I mean, everybody was talking about.
Yes,
Katie's kids.
Which was crazy. So, that same blog that I had been keeping, I started getting approached by publishers like, hey, can we make this a book? Again, by that time, I was probably 20. So I was like, cool, yeah, sure, sounds great. No idea that it would.
And you had already adopted?
I had started the process. The adoption process in Uganda is super long. So you start with foster care, and then you have to foster a child for at least 3 years before you're even eligible to submit adoption paperwork. But I had, through my work in the community, I had relationships with all these different families and all these different children. And over the course of probably obviously I had kind of decided, this is my life's work. I'm staying here. And over the course of the next several years, there would be scenarios where a child would not have a parent. We've talked a lot about how most children do have living relatives. Of course, there are also outliers. There are scenarios where the parents do pass away. There are scenarios where maybe the child just isn't safe in the home because of something tragic going on. And so the first time that this happened was there were 3 little girls in my community. Amazima had already been sponsoring them and paying for their school fees. And they had kind of a series of tragedies in their life where the oldest one ended up in the hospital. She was 9 years old, and they were living with an elderly grandmother, but the 9-year-old was really kind of the primary caregiver who was keeping the family on track. And so the 7 and 5-year-old sisters didn't have a place to go while the 9-year-old was in the hospital. And so I just said hey, well, they can come and crash at my house for a couple days or a couple weeks, till we figure it out. Did not have any idea that I was stepping into motherhood. Again, was just kind of trying to meet the need in front of me. And yeah, then the 9-year-old got out of the hospital and still needed a lot of additional care. So she came to live with me. And over the course of several months, we looked for different family situations where they would be able to have a stronger caregiver. Their grandmother was very elderly and did eventually end up passing away and just wasn't able to totally take care of them in the way that they needed. And we just weren't able to find a family caregiver. And so I filled out paperwork with like the local government social worker to be their foster mom. And we fostered, oh my goodness, I fostered probably 40 kids over the course of the next 10 years. But
between 18 and 28, you were between the ages of 18 and 28, and you had fostered around 40 kids. You weren't even married yet?
No, at the beginning, I was not married. It is really different. I don't think, it wasn't until I was living back in the United States. We moved back here about 3 years ago. And it wasn't until I was living in the United States that I kind of realized like why everybody was always so floored about the volume of kids. I mean, I know it's an unusual number, but community in Uganda felt really different. I always had so much help. There were always neighbors and aunties, people
raising them
in
together?
the community. Yes, yeah. I felt like I was responsible for them at the end of the day, but I had a lot of Ugandan neighbors and friends who were speaking into that and just really helping me and really teaching me and again, really mentoring me and discipling me. And so I'm grateful. I don't think there's any chance people do it. I could not have had that many kids in the United States. I mean, even just cooking food was simpler and easier. We lived in a town where we walked to everything. The kids walked to school. If you had a doctor's appointment, you walked there. Like you walked to your neighbor's house, you walked to the store. There wasn't this like driving your kids around to like a practice or an appointment or a thing. So I don't know. It felt simpler, but essentially, over the course of the next many years, I fostered a lot of kids. And sometimes that was more of a like, hey, let's get you healthy and back on your feet. Or, hey, let's help get your family situation healthy and stabilized. Or let's look for relatives within your community that you might be able to go and stay with. And those kids would go back and live with family. 7 different times that was not an option. So my kids are sibling sets for the most part. And for various really hard, really devastating reasons, they didn't have family members that could take care of them. And so I ended up, fostering them over a long period of time. I was fostering all 13 of our daughters, who we did end up adopting when I met my husband. So I met my husband in 2010.
In Uganda?
Yes, in Uganda. So he was there on actually a short-term trip, and then ended up, was kind of looking around where we were in Uganda and seeing that there were a lot of ministries geared toward women and children, and not really many ministries geared toward men. And he had made some local friends, and they took him to like a tent revival. The preacher stands up, he preaches to thousands of people. Everybody raises their hand to get saved. And Benji, my husband, looked at his friend John and he said, "Oh, okay, now what happens for these men?" And John said, "Well, what do you mean?" And Benji said, like, "Well, do they get connected to the local church?
Yeah.
Do they get any material? Is there any follow-up?" And John said, "No, they just, next time they bring a bigger tent." And so Benji went back to the United States, got 4 of his best guy buddies from Arkansas, and said, "Hey, we're going to Uganda, and we're going to live there and disciple men."
Wow.
So so he came back probably 6 months. So he was there for a couple months, and we interacted a little bit, but not much. And then he came back about a year later with a group of buddies, and they were just living, walking alongside men, doing everyday life with men and trying to get them plugged into the local church and give them discipleship resources. So I hosted a Bible study in my home for a couple of expats that were there, and we would meet together on Wednesday nights. And so he and his friends started coming to our Bible study, and we just became really good friends through that.
I mean, the story just keeps going. I can't imagine stepping into a life, marrying you, and then getting 15 kids. I mean, Benji is quite the guy.
He is quite the guy. Man, I think about it all the time especially when I tell this story, just God, wow, the way you provide. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Benji is, unequivocally like one of the greatest gifts of my life. And when I talk about him, I specifically think like, God, I cannot believe that you would give me that gift of somebody to walk alongside me. And so I had begun some of the paperwork and adoption process when we got engaged, and then we put it on hold until we got married, just so that we could both adopt them all at once, just for last names and paperwork and document stuff. So we got married and spent the next kind of 2 years in a lot of adoption court, making everything official with our girls. And then because God has a sense of humor, we do have 2 biological kids, and they're both boys.
Yeah, that's cool. And you're a great writer. I mean,
thank you.
We have your book, Our Faithful God, which is a 52-week devotional, as a gift to our listeners or watchers. We're on YouTube right now, so people can be watching or listening. If they give a gift to Family Life, especially this month in December, it's matched. So it's doubled.
Awesome.
So I just want to say to our listeners and watchers, give a gift this month. It'll be doubled. And we're going to send you Katie's book, Our Faithful God. Here's how you can give a gift. It's FamilyLifeToday.com. Or you can give us a call, 1-800-358-6329. And I just found out this is the best way to do it on your phone. Just go to 1-800, F as in family, L as in life, and the word today, and we'll send you Katie's book.
Katie also has another book called Safe All Along, Trading Our Fears and Anxieties for God's Unshakable Peace. That's a really good subtitle. We have that in our store, and you can get that at FamilyLifeToday.com. But also, Katie, you've got this beautiful devotional that Dave just talked about, Our Faithful God, 52 weeks of leaning on his unchanging character. And I know that, you probably each one is really probably special, but can you share one that has really stood out to you of one of these days?
Yeah, so the way the devotional is structured is you're reading through a different chapter of scripture each day, and there's a little question at the end, but then on Friday there's a longer reflection that kind of weaves them all together. So I'm going to read us the Friday reflection from week 15, which is titled, God, Our Great Reward. Do not be afraid. It is the most often repeated command in all of Scripture. God must have known how quickly fear and anxiety slip into our hearts. Our minds so readily begin to spiral into worry, and before we know it, we are in a deep abyss of what ifs and what abouts. I am often surprised by how frequently I have to learn again not to be afraid, and by how quickly, just when I think I've got it mastered, I forget yet again. Last week, we read about how Abram gave up his right to the riches he plundered from the 4 eastern kings while saving Lot. He rejected the offer of instant wealth because he wanted God alone to receive all the glory when he finally inherits the land God has promised and becomes a great nation. I have a lot to learn here. Often, when I don't understand what God is doing, or when I feel that he is taking too long to come through on his promises, I'm inclined to take things into my own hands, to look for sufficiency and a solution elsewhere. But not Abram. He's far from home. He's getting old. He still has no children, but he trusts fully in the promise of God. And in reply to his faith, this clear show of trust, God says to Abram, "Do not be afraid. I am your very great reward. Genesis 15:1. Not your land, not your financial security, not your job, not your wife, not your family. I am your shield. I will protect you. I am your great reward. I will be all you need. No amount of riches, no amount of land, no number of descendants could be a better reward than God himself. In your own life, in mine, no amount of success, no amount of financial security, no amount of happiness can rival the reward that is found in relationship with and dependence on our Almighty Father. God himself is what we are seeking. God himself is what we are longing for. God himself is what we need above all else. He may still give the other things, sure. I look around my own life and it is abundantly clear that God has given me good things. He eventually gives Abram a son in his old age and the land of Canaan to his descendants. He rescues his people out of slavery in Egypt and much later out of slavery from sin when he sends his son to die for our ransom. But among all these blessings that God gives, the very greatest reward he gives to Abram and to you and me is himself. God gives us more of himself. It has been many years since God asked Abram to leave his home in Ur, where he first promised Abram that he would make him a great nation. Abram is still waiting on God to fulfill this promise that he will one day have a child. Similarly, today, it has been a great many years since God promised, through Jesus, that he was preparing a place for us to live eternally in heaven. Oh, how I long for the fulfillment of that promise. This broken world seems to get darker by the day as hatred, disease, and destruction fill the headlines. I long for the promised day when Jesus will restore us to himself and wipe away every tear from every eye. Yet in Abram's waiting, and in our own, this is God's promise. He will be our shield, our exceedingly great reward. No matter how long we wait, no matter what comes, no matter what sorrow or loss or heartache this world throws at us, God will still be God, and he will still be good, and he is enough for us. Life with him here and now, and life with him eternal, is our greatest hope, our greatest reward. What are you looking to for comfort and protection today? What would it look like to long for God's presence and nearness above all other tangible rewards the world offers? How can you practice appreciating his presence as your great reward in your everyday life?
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that interview, you don't want to miss any. We upload these every Saturday. You need to subscribe and you won't miss a single one. So subscribe now and we'll see you next week.